Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children, the podcast where I share the recordings of the bedtime stories I've improvised for my children over the years. I'm Dan Winella, your host and storyteller. For almost 20 years, I made up a new story for my children every night at bedtime. Many of those stories were recorded, and now I'd like to share the very best of those with you. I hope you enjoy these stories for wonderful children.
There's a little girl named Winella, and she lives in a very special house, full of many special rooms. The most special room of all is Winella's room, because everything in it is pink and blue. One morning, Winella woke up in her room, and she was laying there, remembering that today was not a school day, and feeling sort of happy about that, because although she loved school, some days she liked to just stay home and read and draw and play outside, and today was one of those days. She knew she probably wasn't going to play outside too much because she could hear the rain pounding on the roof. She always worried about Joey when it was raining outside, even though he had told her many times that he was a bird, and birds were used to being outside when it rained, and that she didn't need to worry about it. So she always felt bad, like she should take him an umbrella or something. But her mommy did not generally let her go up onto the roof when it was raining, because
it was slippery.
That is exactly right, because it was slippery, and she did not want her. She worried about Winella falling off the roof. So,
How tall is Winella?
how tall is Winella? I don't know. I haven't measured her.
What age is Winella?
I'm not sure about that either. I think you've asked me in the past. I think she was 8, isn't she? Of course, she may have turned 9 by now. But in any case, she finally decided that she was getting more hungry enough for breakfast, that it was worth getting out from underneath the warm covers to go down to eat. So she got up and she slid down the stairs, and while she slid down the stairs...
Wait, no. When she got up, she stuck her legs out, felt for slippers, got them, then plopped back in the bed, saying, muttering, "Full start."
Maybe she did. But when she was at last sliding down the stairs, downstairs, she could hear that her mother and father and Wally were all already up and having breakfast. As she came into the dining room, Wally was just saying, "That sounds like a great plan. I'm looking forward to today." "What are we doing?" said Winella. Her daddy said, "Well, I was sort of thinking that since it was raining, we'd go out in the backyard and get some worms that were coming up. And once we've got a can of worms, I thought we'd go fishing." "Ooh," said Winella. "Fishing? That sounds like fun." So that's what they did. After they finished breakfast, they put on their umbrella. They put on their raincoats. They went out in the backyard. Their mama gave them a jar to put the worms in. So they walked around the yard looking for worms that had come up to the surface because it had rained. Winella was wearing her best adventuring boots. They were black, and they were waterproof, so her feet stayed dry. She found about 5 worms. Wally found a handful, and her dad found another 3 or 4. They put the lid on the jar and poked some holes in it, and then put the jar in a cooler with some ice to keep the worms cool. And then they got in the boat, and they drove off.
Did they put them all in the one jar?
Yeah, they put them all in the same jar. And they went off. Her father drove the boat. They had their fishing poles. They got them out of the garage, and they went off down to the lake. They got to the lake, and they sailed out to the middle of the lake. It was still raining quite a bit, but her daddy said that fishing is good when it rains. So they all cast their poles over. Winella was sort of sitting there with water dripping all around her, feeling several different things at once. She felt like she was having fun because she was with her family. And she felt like she was having fun because she didn't get to go fishing that often, and she enjoyed it. But she also felt like it was a little silly to go fishing in the rain, and that she would be equally happy sitting inside, nice and dry and warm, with a book. But she figured she could read a book any day, and she couldn't go fishing any day. So she sat there, and after a couple minutes, Wally's line gave a jerk, and he reeled in, and there was a nice big bass, which is a kind of fish, on his hook. And they put the bass in the cooler. They were going to take it home and eat it, I think. Actually, I'm not sure you can eat bass.
Or maybe they'll stick it on some sort of little wooden thing, give it to someone.
Stuff it.
Wait, no. Maybe they'll put it inside a box, give it to somebody, and when they open it up, a stink bomb will go.
A practical joke fish.
Yeah.
Maybe. So they've been sitting there for a couple minutes when Winella felt her line jerk, and she reeled in, but it was not a fish on the end of her line. It was an old boot. Who would throw an old boot in a lake, said Winella, and she started working on getting the hook out of the boot. And she kind of cleaned some of the dirt off it, and then she said, "What should I do with it, Dad?" And he said, "Oh, just toss it back in the lake." And she said, "Well, I don't want to do that. It'll just make it dirty." And he said, "Well, just hold on to it, then we'll throw it away when we get home." They fished for a while longer. They caught several more fish.
How many did Winella catch?
Winella caught 2 little bluegill fish. Her daddy caught a really very large bass that he was going to have mounted on a wall plate so he could show off to everybody what a big fish he caught. Wally caught another little bluegill and a medium-sized bass that he let go after he caught it. And they were just getting ready to be done when Winella felt one last jerk on her line, and she reeled in, and you'd never guess what it was.
What?
It was a boot. It was a boot that looked exactly like the other boot, except this one was a right boot, and the other one was a left boot. Winella said, "Look, Daddy, I caught the other boot. Now I have a matched set." Said her dad. "Can't say I've ever seen that happen before." "No, I'll take them both home," said Winella. She got her hook out of the boot, and she cleaned it off. And as she cleaned, she noticed something strange. She could have sworn when the boots had first been pulled in that they had been very big. As big as her daddy's feet. But now, as she was cleaning them off, she sort of could have sworn that now they almost looked like they would have fit her. And she looked around to see if there was a size marked on them anywhere, but there wasn't. And she looked at them to see if she could find like a brand name on them anywhere, like Nike or Adidas or Rockport or something like that. Didn't find out who had made the shoes. But she couldn't find one. They were just big black boots. So she put them in the boat. And her daddy turned the boat and started to head home. Well, as they were sailing back across the lake, the wind began to blow. Much harder than it had been. It was still raining. The wind was really blowing. And now Winella was sort of glad they were headed home because it was blowing the rain into her face. And the wind was also blowing up little waves on the lake so that as the boat went across them, it sort of went up and down as it hit the waves. Poof, poof, and so it made for a rough ride. Fortunately, the seats in the boat were a little padded just for times just like this. Because as the wind got harder, it was really starting to jolt when they hit. And then there was a big gust of wind, and they hit the biggest wave yet, and it went bam! And the boots went up, and they flew right out of the boat. And Winella said, "Ah!" And without even thinking about it, she jumped to try to catch them, and the boat went down out from under her, and she was out over the water, and she knew she was going to get wet. And she was a little scared because it was raining pretty hard and the waves were getting pretty big. And she said, "Dad!" Splash! As she fell in. And her dad immediately turned around. And fortunately, Winella was wearing her life jacket because they never went in the boat without wearing a life jacket. So he turned the boat around. But Winella noticed something very strange. She had not caught the boots before she had gone into the water. But as she was floating in her life jacket, trying to keep water out of her face, she saw them floating right near her were the boots. She said, "Boots don't float." And she sort of paddled over to them, and she caught and she got them, and she saw that not only were they floating, but they were floating in a very peculiar way. Usually when something floats, it sort of floats so it's half in the water and half out of the water. These boots were floating perfectly, entirely on the top of the water. None of them was down below the water. Winella had been around enough unusual and magical things to recognize when something was not quite right. So while her daddy turned the boat around, Winella grabbed the boots and kicked off her own waterproof boots under the water, and she put them on. And they fit her just right, and then she stepped up onto the top of the water, and she did not sink. Wearing those boots, she could just walk up one wave and down the next, and she turned and she ran back to the boat. And Wally and her father almost ran the boat into her because they were so surprised to see her coming running across the top of the water towards her. But she jumped, and she jumped into the boat, and Wally was just sitting there with his mouth open. And her father was looking at her, and she said, "Hi, Dad. Hi, Wally. Can we go home now?" And her dad said, "Well, I think we better because you're soaking wet." And so they turned and they went home. When Winella got home, she got undressed. And her mom wanted to put her in a warm bath because she got in a lake. She took the boots with her into the bath. She cleaned them the rest of the way, although her mother was not thrilled about it. And when she got done cleaning herself, she put the boots back on, and she walked around on the top of the water in the bathtub. And her mother looked at her and said, "Oh, that's something I've never seen before."
What?
She walked around on top of the water in the bathtub.
And her mom said what?
Her mother said, "Well, that's something I've never seen before." So she took the boots off, and then she got dressed in nice warm clothes. She went downstairs and wrapped herself in a blanket, and she read for the rest of the day. And she put the water boots in her closet, figuring you never knew when a pair of boots that let you walk on top of water would come in handy. And that's the end.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but heckling and clever commentary were supplied by my children. The theme music was created by Brandon Thompson, and the logo was designed by Silas Wendelin. If you know someone who might enjoy the stories, please tell them about the show. Our website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.com, and preview snippets are posted to most social media. I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.